So this is the last session of the conference, and I'm pressing the green button to see what happens. The summary and closing. As somebody said earlier, that's just me, and so that doesn't matter. So my job basically is to keep you here until 4:30 when your mummies and daddies come to collect you. My wife specifically told me not to use that line, but I couldn't resist it. So the question is how to fill the time. Normally at this point in a long couple of days, what we do is we show pictures of cats that look like Donald Trump or something like that to keep people amused. But actually my actual job is to try and kind of summarize what we've experienced in the last couple of days. And 39% of you have been through this experience before. And still yet here I am. How can this be stopped? There is a way to do that. There's a delegate survey in your bags, and all you have to do is appropriately fill in that last item there, and I won't have to do this again. So feel free to use your editorial judgment when you're doing that. But also do fill in the survey. This is an excellent time in which to occupy yourself filling in that survey. My job is to try and sort of remind you, because you will have all forgotten through fatigue, what you've been through in the last couple of days. And my focus tends to be on yesterday. I'm kind of sort of hoping you remember what happened today, or at least this afternoon, so I won't be focusing on that so much. So if we look at our kind of visual agenda of our couple of days, and I've not mentioned the workshops here because we've just heard from the workshops, so I can kind of trust to that being stuck in your memory. And my job during the conference, as well as sitting here and managing questions, and thankfully Ruby and her team have done everything else that I did last year in terms of what temperature is the room and who's got coffee and who hasn't. So my other job is to basically, throughout the conference, try and, in a sense, synthesize what's gone on and turn it into something. And ideally not just kind of run through the agenda and go, well, Rick told us this, and then Michael and Richard did that. But to try and sort of rejig the agenda into some, coherent manner that makes a new kind of knowledge from that. And this year, I think my theme is quite a simple one. So looking through the various topics, I've decided this is going to be the theme of the summary and recap. It's going to be, okay. So bear with me as I try and encapsulate these 2 days in this heading here. So the first R is attitude. And I'm going to pull a couple of things. Mostly, actually, very early on, I was noting Mark Allen's comments from Wiley, just in the opening keynote. But actually, other things came out during the 2 days. And it's about having a sort of attitude about scholarly communication. So what values do we represent? And are we putting the researcher at the centre of what we do? Going back on that for a second, I had some queasy moments yesterday thinking, have I named the conference poorly by calling it researcher to reader? Because does that almost, in some people's minds, exclude librarians and technologists and publishers and so forth? And this cycle that you see here is supposed to include all of that kind of thing, but actually the only people we name in the title are the researchers and the researchers. So we have to remind ourselves about all the other players in that, but we do have to keep the research at the centre. Be a partisan for science. I like that very much. It's time for publishers to be bold was one of the things that Mark said. And there are other things that I haven't kind of included as bullet points here, but were said throughout the conference about being confident and bold and innovative and kind of interesting and good about how we're going to work in this scholarly communications world. So that's my first A of the R. You're now welcome to guess what the other ones might be and scroll them back on the back of an envelope, or in Phil's case, play conference word bingo, because I know he's a big fan of that on Twitter. So what's the next one? Authenticity. And I think that's important. It's about being honest and about being authentic and about facts are facts. And again, this is something Mark said, but evidence is evidence. And what is the evidence? And we had a little bit of discussion there about what's the evidence about green open access, what's the evidence about this, what's the evidence about that. But, most of the people in this room are involved in science, they're involved in evidence, and I think we have to have an authentic evidence-based attitude to that, and we saw some of that coming out in the discussions and some of the presentations. In some ways, some of the best presentations are those based on actual research with actual graphs and data and good things like that, rather than assertions of positions or viewpoints. So that's our number 2. Our number 3, some alternatives. A couple of things to mention in a couple of presentations, and I wanted to just highlight a few of those. I'm just going to list those out here, but things we do forget because we tend to talk about STEM journals, and we forget about books and print and retail and the role of intermediaries, whether those are distributors or aggregators or how those are working. We tend to forget about languages other than English, and there's been some interesting work just recently about what the Anglicization of publishing is doing to scholarly research in other languages and so forth. We tend to forget about humanities. I don't think it's even been mentioned once in 2 days. We tend to forget about textbooks. And actually textbooks are really interesting, if nothing else from a business model and kind of piracy perspective. They're a particularly hot area. And we don't talk about these things. So these are a kind of to-do list for me of things that are not perhaps central to what we do, but important that we pay attention to. Abundance is my next R. Now, who's noticed the A is changing colour as we go up the... Okay, pay attention. Come on, pay attention. The good part about that is when I'm getting close to the end, so that's the main thing. Abundance of books and sales per title in books is falling, and the supply of content is growing faster than the number of readers. And, we do have this massive abundance. And, can we market our way out of that? And Jacob was talking about, marketing to increase the usage of content, or at least discovery of appropriate content. And it may be that's doable. But actually, there is strong data that says the number of researchers and the amount of research being publishing is growing at a rate that's basically unsustainable in terms of cost of managing it and also discoverability of the right thing. So that's sort of journal numbers and researcher numbers are growing. People are inundated with content, and it's true. And then discriminating between the content they want and the content they are just being inundated with is a massive chance. So that abundance, there's a kind of problem of abundance there. What's the next R? Affordability. This all started, we've had a lot of debates back and forth about open access and all that good stuff, and this started with affordability. This started with subscriptions are not affordable, what should we do? And it's kind of turned into we want everything to be just freely available, and that's kind of a slightly different thing, and I don't think we deconstruct that very well between are we talking about money or are we talking about kind of freedom and knowledge transfer, because they do have different implications how we talk about that, and that's been debated greatly. So that takes us on to some of the absurdities of not, in a sense, addressing those issues directly. So if open access doesn't make subscriptions unnecessary, then what is the point of it? I think is a valid question. And, there's questions about if Green OA works, then it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, then it works, kind of thing. So that is a serious difficulty, and as the Matrix tells us, Mr. Anderson is taking considerable risks even by attempting to clarify and address those issues. And this is a direct quote from Danny Kingsley, actually, so that's nice to have on there. Danny, you here? I can't see. I'm introducing Danny when she's gone home. Anyway, so, the absurdity of some of the debating positions we get into, in a sense, by not being authentic and addressing the truths behind these things and not having a grown-up conversation which tries to unpick these things, I think has some dangers. And I'd like to think we in this conference address those things in a kind of grown-up way. There's a lot about access. There's a lot of A's with access. So there's an access which is about entitlement and authentication and security and so forth. And somebody tweeted this cartoon. I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, but I thought it was kind of apt. St. Peter checking through your identity information could be a tricky moment. But there is this trade-off between putting barriers up to ensure identity and access and entitlement is right versus frictionless and so on. And so that access issue is an important issue. There's also access about print versus electronic and physical versus virtual and those kind of issues. And print is very undead. This slide I'm mostly putting up. This is a presentation I gave at the London Book Fair in 2010, of all things. I'm mostly putting it up because that That blue sphere took me about an hour and a half to create, but I'm quite proud of it. But I gave a presentation at London Book Fair which was called What My Children Have Taught Me About eBooks. And I just asked my children how they behaved in terms of digital content. But one of the slides I put up, which is the point of this really, is the next slide, which is my son's A-level English Wuthering Heights book that he was annotating and analysing. And here it is an actual page. And so this is one of the reasons why print is so important, is because annotating and highlighting and accessibility is fantastically important. And although he's a born digital kind of a person in a sense, he was scribbling and highlighting, as so many of us do, and as so many of us find hard to do in a purely paperless digital way. So that's another access issue. The third one really in access is about usability and accessibility, and yes, we need more academics and researchers and real people at this conference, and it is a tremendous challenge. I've taken some steps to try and encourage that. The ticket prices for academics and researchers are very low compared to the headline prices, but we do need to seek out people in these real practicing academics and get them involved in this discussion, and that's a real challenge for us going forwards. Also then on accessibility and usability and physical versus electronic, here's the virtual library. It's more important than the physical library, and that's a very important piece of data from the Taylor and Francis research that was done. If you can't quite see that graph, then here's a visible version of that that's more accessible. But that is, again, user behaviors. People are not using physical libraries as much as they might, but they are using physical libraries still to a very significant extent. And then my final kind of usability one is from Jan's comments, which is about iterativeness and user experience and being nimble and failing and all those kind of things. And I think one of the problems for all publishers and all librarians is in trying to experiment in user experience and to learn from that and see what users actually do and how they behave, and not just what they tell you in a focus group, which is almost always a lie. And you've got to just find a way to test that accessibility in an agile kind of way, and that seems crucial. So we're about halfway through the A's now, so this is going reasonably well. Antagonism. There is a little tension, of course, in the scholarly communications world. In a sense, I'm keen on that. I think one of the things we, again, here have quite a grown-up debate about the different tensions and philosophical positions and realities that go on. I think we do need to be a little careful about it. So one panellist said they really don't want to hear emotive language like saying authors are forced to give up copyright. That's very unhelpful. I'm not naming names because he was a little chastened when I taxed him with this. But about 5 minutes later, he said, publishers and scholarly societies have grown fat from the profit of copyright, and I thought that was perhaps a little unhelpful as well. So one man's unhelpful comment is another man's deeply held religious belief, and so we need to have that vigorous debate, but we need to be careful about antagonism. Somebody talked about publishers and their bags of money. Somebody else talked about publishers being dibbed out of some money and trying to avoid that. You can guess who used the term dibbed out. I think that's a well-known colloquialism. So we do need to have a lively debate, but we need to be careful about respecting, I suppose, other people's positions. Next ambiguity. A lot of ambiguity. I'm struggling with terminology. I think some of you probably are. So here was a definition that was made clear, a few things. And so firstly, do we mean open access or do we mean public access? Do we mean access for academics openly or do we mean access for everybody openly? Do we care? Is that important? And then green and gold. And here are some definitions that were put up, green and gold. And kind of immediately, Danny tweeted some alternative definitions, some alternative facts about what green and gold mean, and both positions are quite current and right in a sense. But if we can't agree what we're talking about and the terms we're using, and we have ambiguity about it, and if somebody says, green OA will never work, and somebody else says, yes, it will, but actually they have different definitions, we're in trouble. And I'd really like to see some work done on clarifying and unambiguizing, that's not a word, de-ambiguizing, clarifying anyway, what it is that our terminology is. Sorry? Disambiguating. Thank you very much. Excellent. Good. I had a bit of a go at it. So I was playing with architecture. Usually when I do this summary, one of the things I do is I pull out usually the speakers that all have a sort of diagram of boxes and arrows all connecting together, and there's a complex life cycle thing goes on. And I usually pull out 2 or 3 of those and display them. Not so much this year, so I did my own, you'll be thrilled to know. So while looking at this definitions and ambiguity, I did, I think, a really useful diagram, which really attempts to clarify the situation. So I think that do I need to? I could explain that very slightly, but I tried to do a diagram which said, well, you've got the authors up here writing about stuff, and then you've got some sort of added value activity you could call publishing, and who's doing that, and is that you can't read it. It says corporate, not-for-profit, institutional society under publishers. Who are all these people? And then stuff is being published, and maybe it's green and maybe it's gold, and do those both mean open, and how does that all work? And then that dissemination is coming out to the readers, and it's coming out through academic libraries and public libraries, and directly if it's kind of free and open and magical. So there's a whole sort of complexity thing there going on, and I'm seeking clarity and coherence in that. And you'll be pleased to see I've even added freemium at the bottom, Toby. So that's architecture, added value. So we had this discussion about what publishers do, and I think I'm still happy to keep having that conversation about, is publishing a real thing? What do publishers do? What is publishing? Is there just a button? I like that from Kent very much, is that, press publish here. And, the conference website is on, what is the conference website? On WordPress. And so I can publish the website very easily, but it's based on thousands of lines of code and hosting that other people do for me. So we did have a sort of a healthy discussion about all the things that are going on in that process, and they're not insignificant. There's considerable amount. And I'd like to see more on that. I'd like to see some real costs on that. I'd like to see some serious thought given into what publishing ought to cost, so that then we can see what that getting fat on profiteering actually looks like. So that was another Anderson moment, really. It's another Matrix quote I thought of throw in there. But, I think it's worth plugging in and keeping going on these issues. So that's my last A. So we're doing reasonably well on timing. So I've just got G and H to go. So prematurely, perhaps, G is goodbye. And then we come to H, which is slightly weird, but you'll understand in a moment. So a last couple of goodbye things. Slides and videos will be available. So the videoing's been done by Zeba TV, which is Carve's business, and in 2-3 weeks we should have the videos up for you to watch. So that'll be great. Before you go, there is one thing you have to do. Can anyone guess what it is? Fill in the Delegate Survey. Thank you. If you've lost your form, there are extra forms at the back. You cannot leave the building until you've completed your Delegate Survey. So no, please do. It is enormously useful for us in improving the conference going forward. So that's some admin-y things. And really the last goodbye thing before I get on to H, because H is coming up, is if you'd like to go to Scholarly Social, lots of people have signed up for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's just around the corner. I hope to get to it as soon as I've done all the washing up. So that will be great. I think we're on to H now. Goodbye. Last goodbye. Very important. Can't resist doing that. The sponsors. Thank you so much, sponsors. Please recognise the sponsors. Please read their blurbs in the programmes, read their brochures if you haven't thrown them away already. They are a very important part of the funding of the conference, and without them, ticket prices would be unaffordable. So they are a crucial part of this process. H, hello. Hello comes after goodbye because hello is about the future. So, first question is, should we do one of these next year? It's not a rhetorical question. Should we do one of these next year? Yes? Yeah, okay, all right. Oh, God. Okay, good. Yeah, happy to do that. Right, all right, good. If so, it's probably going to be the same sort of time. So 19th, 20th February. There's a bit of a tension. Sorry for Americans because it is President's Day, but otherwise it's half term. So we kind of have to just deal with that. We'd like some suggestions for topics and speakers. There will be a proper call for papers, but you can just email info@r2r.conference.com if you've got suggestions for topic speakers you want to suggest yourself or somebody else. Always welcome. Can't have anyone called Anderson, though. No, I think we've overdone that. Book early, please. You've heard this before if you're in the 39%. So here's the booking profile for the conference. So this is the bars are weekly registrations up to the 100% people who came. And you can see our top registration week was 3 weeks ago. That does create some difficulties. It creates a couple of difficulties. One is a kind of practical, operational difficulty for the venue as to how many people we're going to have. Also, my doctor is very concerned about my health, and my heart will not survive another year in which 36% of delegates register in February. And you know who you are, and more importantly, I know who you are. So I would be most grateful if people could decide much earlier to register for the conference just for the sake of my health. Okay, very last couple of things. Bring a researcher with you. So when you register, also find a friendly researcher and make them register too. If you're a corporate kind of organisation, you could sponsor a researcher as a guest. If you're an organisation that works with researchers, like a library, you could grab one. I think it's going to have to be like that, actually, seriously now. I think it's going to have to be personal. I think the people in this room are going to have to personally reach out to an academic and say, you should come to this. I know you don't think you should, but you should. It can't be done by, advertising and email and stuff. It's going to have to be personal. So if you care about that, then you need to make it happen. And if we're here next year and we're saying, oh, if only we had some researchers to debate with, it's going to be kind of all our fault. I'm going to do everything I can to support that and make it work better, but we really have to do that. And last, probably, maybe last, volunteers for the advisory board. I am open to a couple more volunteers for the advisory board. As I say, the demographic is not exclusive, but I'm very keen to invite applications from women, from librarians and academics, and from people in the second half of the alphabet. So if you'd like to step up, if you're in any of those categories, then please do so. And that is the closing of the conference. Thank you very much. Go.